From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast is Andre Johnson.
Junior.
Do not forget about the Junior. It's very important to add the JR at the end of his name. But before we get started with today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, and review. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, get the bell notification. But when we drop that fire content today, we're back in the business, back in the building. It's Monday, a game day Monday, because we're just going to wrap up a Saints preseason on Sunday in front of the Superdome, in front of the home in the Superdome, in front of the home fans. And it was an interesting game, some interesting developments that I know you want to hear about. We're going to talk about. We're going to get into it as well. But first things first, a new week is here. Andre, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good. We're pretty much through the preseason now, heading into the regular season. We've got that awkward week where it's a lull, and we're going to be talking about cuts and last-second additions, but we're knocking on that door of the regular season when things really get fun around here.
Yeah, it gets fun, and it kind of – people think I'm crazy when I say this, but preseason is actually more difficult for us.
Yeah.
Because it's people are football starved. The schedule's not quite as coordinated. It's not quite as regular. And I spent 27 days in California. I'm not complaining about that. Don't get me wrong. But it's preseason is a little more chaotic. Once the regular season gets here, things kind of go with a routine that we've all kind of become accustomed to. But speaking of the preseason, we saw the preseason last night come to an end for the Saints. They lose to Tennessee, but there were some winners in the game that wore black and gold. There's no doubt about that. And I know what you guys are talking about today because you've been talking about it ever since the game ended. That Spencer Rattler and the Saints QB2 battle between he and Jake Haener. Rattler had himself a day yesterday, so I think that's a good spot to go with the big picture today.
Definitely. Spencer Rattler showed out in the preseason finale. He dropped a dime to Equanimous St. Brown for a touchdown. He looked good from beginning to end, and you kind of saw the Saints, instead of just letting one guy go and benching the other, they kind of alternated between the two quarterbacks, which is pretty rare to see in the preseason. But now that that game is over, not that the preseason's over for the Saints, it's time to ask the big question that people have been essentially asking since draft day, and that's where are you on the Jake Haener versus Spencer Rattler quarterback competition? Who deserves that quarterback 2 spot?
Man, they've both done some good things. It's been a good competition, and you saw it yesterday. You saw it. Jake Haener actually had a better game than I think people realize. It's just it wasn't quite the splash plays that Spencer Rattler had. I went back and I watched all their snaps, all their pass attempts. Their rotation was interesting. I was not expecting that rotation. And when I went back and watched it, I still don't quite get it. I still don't quite get the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter type thing. But nonetheless, they have their reasons, and I'm sure it was to get certain situations to be front and center with certain players. But here's where it boils down to. This is a fairly long-winded answer to the question, but I think if you were to just simply take the 25 practices and 3 preseason games and go with each player and grade each one, all 25 practices and all 3 preseason games, I think Jake Haener would have the higher score. I think he's had the better camp. He's been the more consistent player at executing this offense. DA even said in his post-game press conference, which was a little interesting, that they felt like he had taken a step forward in the last 8 to 10 days in practice, and they were waiting to see the reasons why it didn't go as good in the games. But facts are facts. Haener had a consistent preseason training camp practices, and he did better than he did a season ago in the preseason, which obviously last year was so high and so low between the practices and the game. So he did get marginally better or a little bit better in the preseason action than he did a season ago. So that obviously helps Haener. Yeah. But it's like we said earlier, while Haener has been the more consistent player, while Haener has had the overall better camp, with Spencer Rattler, once you see the arm talent, it's hard to unsee it. We saw it last night. That was good, Spencer Rattler. That was, it's not like he's been all over the place. It's not like he's been terrible, but he's been just not quite as consistent in practice as Jake Haener has been. But in the games, he has elevated in 2 of the 3 games that he has played. What would you say? Maybe the first game, kind of a draw between those 2?
Yeah.
Second one, I would probably give the nod to Haener. Third one, I would give the nod to Spencer Rattler. So you're right on. I mean, they are neck and neck. But you can see the vision with Spencer Rattler. Not the vision. The ceiling with Spencer Rattler. How it can, if some other things could come together, you could see a higher ceiling with him. He's just not... there's a reason why he was drafted where he was drafted, but that you can certainly see some of the arm talent that can be enticing. More importantly, he saved his best performance of camp for last.
Yep.
If he'd have done this in the first preseason game and then stunk it up second and third preseason game, we wouldn't be talking about him right now. But the best performance he had all camp, if you had all 25 practices that he participated in and all 3 preseason games, his best performance came last. So that is the lasting image we have of Spencer Rattler going into and out of the preseason, this really fantastic performance that he had last night. I also thought it was interesting that they brought Jake Haener back in late. Mm-hmm. I'm still trying to make sense of that, because are they trying to say, okay, let's just see what he does in the situation, that this will help us kind of break the tie? Or I'm still trying to figure this out in terms of where Haener, sending Haener back in. What I would do, I'm not going to get into. I'm going to get in what I think, and I don't have a strong conviction on this. So when I say my gut, I'm saying like just barely leaning in this direction. So don't get it misconstrued, because if it went the other way, I would absolutely not be surprised. But I still think my gut instinct right now, today, if it had to turn to a backup, they still slightly trust Jake Haener a little bit more. Second year in the system, seems to have picked up from just kind of the practice operation. And like I said, I felt like he had an okay game yesterday. He wasn't terrible yesterday. He had a couple bad breaks that happened in the game. The fumble was terrible play. But overall, I thought he had a decent day. And overall, he had a pretty good preseason. His highs were not as high as Spencer Rattler's. We saw that. We know that. So that's what my gut is telling me right now. Week 7, week 8 may not be the case. But right now, I still think that's the case. Bottom line, though, is we talked about the big picture a lot, and let's not lose sight of the bigger picture, because as much as we're talking about this right now, it's not the most pressing need for the Saints, and it's a fun debate to have in preseason. But if everything goes according to plan, it's really not going to be a topic for much. Now, if you don't know what's going to happen, knock on wood, we'll see what happens from a health standpoint or a production standpoint, and we'll see what happens, and we'll turn to that when we have to turn to that. But bigger picture for me is, don't lose sight of the fact, back-to-back years, the Saints have now invested in day 3 quarterbacks, and I think they've kind of hit on both of them. Like, they've kind of, you make a day 3 investment. Your investment in a day 3 quarterback is to basically hope that they can be a quality backup someday, to where if they've had the spot start, you can trust those guys to do it. Now, will they be perfect? Of course not. Of course not. There's a reason why they were drafted the way they were drafted, and we know the probability of guys drafted outside the first round to ever become stars in the NFL. But especially at the quarterback position. But in a recent run of, some hits and misses in the draft, I think this is, you can kind of, give the Saints some credit here that they have really hit these last 2 guys. The moment has not been too big for either one of these guys. Look, I go back to, you weren't here, but when they had Garrett Grayson, when they drafted Sean Canfield, at no point did any of those guys ever feel like they were confident in themselves to lead and execute the New Orleans Saints offense. Now, they had Drew Brees, a Hall of Famer, ahead of them, but still, I just, from a body language standpoint and just a, call it moxie, confidence standpoint, both these guys have it. So that's where I'm kind of at with it. I know the majority of the fan base, including the ones probably leaving the comments right now, are all Team Rattler. I got no problem with it. If that's where you're at, I got no problem with it. I can understand why. It's like I said, it's hard to unsee it. But again, what I think the Saints coaches are, I still think today, maybe not tomorrow or the next day, but today, slightly a little more trust in Haener. But I think that could flip at some point.
You mentioned this race being neck and neck, and if you tally up the preseason stats through those 3 games, Jake Haener, 207 yards, 24 for 43 passing, that's 56%. 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He was sacked 1 time. To be fair, he did throw a touchdown yesterday. It got called back because of a penalty. Spencer Rattler, 202 yards passing, 5 less than Haener. 20 for 38 passing, 53%. 3 percentage points less than Haener. He was sacked 3 times. He scored 2 touchdowns, 1 passing yesterday, 1 rushing in the first game. He lost a fumble in the second game. So I understand why fans lean Rattler, because if you look at those numbers, they do slightly point more towards Spencer Rattler, and that's all the fans have seen because the Saints did
that's it. Right.
Training camp in California. For most Saints fans, all they've seen from this team, minus the 1 practice at Tulane and the 1 practice in the Dome last week, all they've seen are the preseason games. But Dennis Allen and those making decisions did get to see 3 weeks, 4 weeks worth of practices. And that's where I think Jake Haener has kind of taken the lead. And you mentioned, Dennis Allen even talked about it. He said, especially in the last week and a half, Jake Haener has really separated himself in practice. And that does matter to this coaching staff. And when you look at the 2 quarterbacks, I think Haener gives you a level of consistency. He has been a better practice player. Rattler gives you the upside. He gives you the athleticism that maybe you're not getting from Haener. I also slightly lean Haener, or I believe that the coaching staff at least is slightly leaning Haener.
I'm still not sure what I would do. If I was tasked with that decision, I'm still not sure what I would do. But anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Exactly. And again, let me reach over, knock on this wood. But I think if something were to happen to Derek Carr, the name that they would call as of right now to step in and be the quarterback for this team would be Jake Haener. But it's interesting to mention, this competition didn't end yesterday.
Right.
The Saints are going to be practicing throughout the season.
Right.
There's going to be scout team. There's going to be second team reps. And Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler, since neither of them set themselves apart head and shoulders in the first 3 preseason games and throughout training camp, they're going to keep going at it, whether we see it or not. So if one of them is needed to step in later in the season, the gap may be wider. The coaching staff may be more confident in who they would call name-wise to step in and hopefully get a win for the Saints at that point.
And here's the other thing, and I've mentioned this. They don't have to tell us. They don't have to tell us. They could do the whole thing on the depth chart where they say Rattler or Haener, where they don't want to give us any sort of inkling of who's ahead. It's not like they got to declare our backup quarterback is, because 90% of the time you go out to practice, it's all the QB1 is getting 90% of the snaps. The QB2 will get a couple snaps, but by that point, we're not even in there to see it.
Right.
So they don't have to tell us, and it could very well be a week-to-week thing. Well, look, this matchup here today, maybe Rattler might give us a little bit better here. This matchup here today, maybe Haener gives us a little bit better matchup here in terms of what we got to do. And there's also there's a difference between preparing to be, okay, we want this guy to be our number 2 on game day, like if he's got to be inserted, versus, okay, the starter's out and you prepare for a guy all week. Sometimes that's different. Yeah. Like the in-game relief pitcher versus the guy that's able to start from down from the first down of the game, first down 1, play 1. So all little different subtleties, but I don't know where you stand with this, but I kind of like these day 3 investments in quarterbacks. We've always said it's good business to invest in the quarterback position. I think both these guys kind of hold this true. If you get it right, I mean, look what they've done to the second and third team reps for the offense and defense by just their presence. So I think it's been worthwhile investments for both players with the Saints and draft picks.
I agree. I think this has been one of the more interesting preseasons that the Saints have had in a while, because I was talking to some people who were in the Dome. Some of my friends went to the game. And that Dome, and you could even hear it over the TV, late fourth quarter in a preseason game, the Dome is genuinely rocking.
Yeah.
How often, no matter how hardcore of a fan you are, how often are you watching all 4 quarters down to the last minute of a preseason game? Most fans aren't doing that. But game 1, people were locked in to see Spencer Rattler lead that game-winning drive. Game 3, people were locked in to see if Jake Haener would be able to lead that game-winning drive. And I think that this competition between the two of them, who both of them have stepped in and they've played good at times, they've struggled at times, as you would expect young quarterbacks to do, it's made this preseason very riveting from a fan perspective. And I think that the Saints as an organization are smiling at the job that they did picking these 2 young quarterbacks.
Yeah, and that's all you can ask for when you make a day 3 investment in a quarterback, because so few become anything. So if you got a guy that you can, got a little something there to work with, develop, neither one are ready to take over. Any talks out there about starting quarterback, please, just please don't. These guys are not ready to be a starting quarterback. These guys are ready to, be backups, high-end backups right now. So But no, they're not. Neither one are overtaking Derek Carr. I know that's sometimes they go a little too far out there with their excitement over certain players, but that's certainly not happening. But you're certainly gonna like where the team stands with both those guys and how much those guys embrace the competition. And we talked to both of them yesterday, and I've talked to a few of them throughout camp. I talked to them, both a few times throughout camp. You can feel like the confidence, but also the ease. Like it's not getting to them. Like they have confidence, but there's like an ease about them. Like they understand the situation. So I think that's certainly a good thing to do, a good place to be. But bottom line, I like where this quarterback room stands, just because I think you got a couple of young guys that you like their development, and you got a starter that I know he doesn't necessarily elicit a lot of excitement from some in the fan base, but I watched him interact with fans. He still has a lot of fans in the city. I think he's a guy that I think the organization, from what I understand, last year they were never close to benching him ever at any point, even when he was injured. That they still feel like with the system that they can win, because honestly, and if they don't win, it won't be because of the quarterback position.
Right, but if they don't win, one position it may be because of is the offensive line. And we've got to talk about the offensive line, because throughout the preseason, when you talk about the deficiencies and the weaknesses of that offensive line, one player's name has come up, and we did a podcast about him recently, and that was Trevor Penning. But I have a question. Do you feel like Trevor Penning is kind of being the scapegoat for this offensive line in a bit?
It's starting to annoy me a little bit, because I was listening to a couple of shows last night and into today, and the Saints have offensive line concerns. There's no doubt about that. That's very apparent. I think it's very real inside the facility, inside the organization. And it's just so easy to move your eye straight to number 70 and just put it all on him. I'm here to shift that narrative, because yes, he has struggled at times, but I thought his tape yesterday was there was more good than bad against Tennessee. But the whole reason for offensive line concerns is not just because of Trevor Penning. He is a part of that concern, but he is not the only reason. Let's just go walk through it real quick. Your left guard is Lucas Patrick, a veteran, a guy they trust. But is he a top-end guard? Probably not. He's somewhere, I don't know where you rank him in. Taliese Fuaga is a rookie. He got beat. One of Haener's best plays yesterday was a play where Fuaga got beat, and he kind of had to climb and kind of readjust, and he hit to A.T. Perry. A.T. Perry kind of bobbled the ball on the way out of bounds, so that negated a nice play for Haener. Would have helped his stats, obviously, but that is what it is. Rattler had a couple of drops as well. And then we're all of a sudden on the Cesar Ruiz train. Not we, but there's a positive talk about Cesar Ruiz, and that's fine. Where would you rank him as amongst the right guards in the NFL?
Probably right in the middle.
So that's my point.
Yeah.
And then you got McCoy, who's rock solid. I'd make him a top 10 center. And then the depth, which every team is struggling with, is a drop-off. Like, if your whole point is the Saints have an offensive line, the Saints offensive line is bad because of Trevor Penning, you're just not seeing the big picture, because it's bigger than that. If it was just that, it'd be easy to fix.
Yeah.
It'd be easy to fix, because you just go out and get somebody to replace him and move on. But there's bigger concerns with that. But in saying that, I think there's no way you can go into the season with your current offensive line as is. You've got to find some kind of insurance somewhere. Even if that guy is not a starter, you have got to find some kind of insurance, whether it's a late-round pick, whether it's a veteran that gets released, somebody with some experience that has been in the system like this, that understands how to play ball and understands the rigors, the things you can kind of trust. Even if he's not a great player anymore, you've got to have some kind of insurance up front along the offensive line, because once you get past the 5, and I still think Penning's the guy right now. I still, unless they bring somebody else in, I still think it's Penning. You got Ali Udoh, Landon Young, I guess Nick Saldiveri, who's kind of been MIA, though I think he might be one of those short-term IR guys to start the season. And then right now I got like Shane Lemieux on my roster projection, which if they keep 9, maybe he's the guy, maybe not. But none of those guys to me elicit a whole lot of hope and praise. But I think you've got to add one more guy that's either a high-end backup or a potential starter somewhere, somehow, some way, because it's too important for the entirety of the offense to leave that up to chance.
I agree. Two things can be true. Trevor Penning has struggled early in his career and at times during this preseason, but Trevor Penning is not the problem on the offensive line, because let's throw a hypothetical out there. Let's say Ryan Ramczyk was your starting right tackle. Mm-hmm. Would the Saints have a top 10 offensive line? No. They'd still have a rookie at left tackle. Mm-hmm. They'd still have an unproven commodity at left guard, whether it's the Lucas Patrick or Nick Saldiveri or whoever you plug in. You've still got an unproven commodity there. You mentioned Cesar Ruiz, pretty much average in the world of right guards. Your offensive line still isn't elite, even if you had a top-end right tackle instead of Trevor Penning. Would it solve some problems? Sure. Mm-hmm. Would it solve all your problems on the offensive line? No, it wouldn't. And your offensive line would still be one injury away from a disaster. Mm-hmm. Because Jermon Bushrod was watching the game with us yesterday in studio, and Jermon Bushrod was basically like, when it comes to the offensive line, it's not if somebody gets injured, it's when somebody right. gets injured. That's the position that takes a beating more than anybody else. And right now, if an injury happened, you don't have a lot of reliable guys to step in. Again, knock on wood, if something happened to Eric McCoy, who can step in and be the center, the quarterback of that right. offensive line?
Do they kick over Lucas Patrick? Is it Cesar Ruiz? I mean, that's a great question.
Exactly. And right now, you really don't have a definitive answer to that question. Now, tomorrow, about 1,000 players across the NFL are going to get cut. So we'll see once those cuts happen, you'll see kind of which players could potentially make their way to New Orleans, who some late signings could be to improve that offensive line. I don't know if you find a starter necessarily, but you could definitely find backup. You can find depth. You could find somebody to at least help the offensive line to the degree of veterans or
an insurance policy. I mean, give you an insurance policy.
Exactly.
You know? Excuse me. Yeah, I agree, and I think it's not. I think you'll see two areas addressed in the post cut down day wave of players that become available, either via late round trade, mid round trade, or waiver request or whatever. I think you'll see someone on the offensive line, and I think you'll see. Now I'm probably leaning more towards running back because Cabody, I thought he helped himself, but I don't think he's making the team. I think he's a practice squad written all over him. I don't think it's Mims and Robinson. I think it's one or the other. I like Jamal Williams, but, you know, we'll see what happens. I didn't think he didn't have a great year last year. We'll see how he does in the system. But I do think you could probably add one more playmaker there because we don't know what's going to happen with Kendre Miller.
Right.
You probably are wondering, does Kendre make the team? I have no idea. I think he's probably going to be saved by this, short-term IR to start the season. But that's an issue. I mean, that's a major issue that your third-round pick from a season ago is unavailable, and they still don't know what's happening right now. So we'll see. But I still think that there is no way the Saints are just going to make their cuts and be like, all right, the 53 we got our guys. I think there's going to be some movement post Tuesday roster moves.
Another position I think they need to make a move at is wide receiver because through 3 preseason games, I still don't think there's necessarily one guy who stood out and was like, hey, I'm the wide receiver 3 on this team. Dennis Allen said it before the 3rd preseason game. He's looking at a lot of positions for guys to literally step up and show like, hey, this is my job and I'm going to take it. I don't know if anybody did that through the preseason, especially yesterday. There were a lot of dropped passes.
Yeah.
Bub Means, A.T. Perry. We didn't see Cedric Wilson yesterday, which is probably a good sign for Cedric Wilson when you start looking at the depth chart and where he could wind up landing on it.
I think him not playing was a big statement. I think he's because he's their best blocker. I think he's their best blocking wide receiver.
Exactly. Equinemius St. Brown had the touchdown catch, but he also had another great throw from Spencer Rattler on the left sideline that it wasn't completed, but it seems like that was more of an EQ St. Brown thing than a Spencer Rattler issue. So we'll see where, even if Cedric Wilson winds up being a 3rd receiver, who's your 4th, who's your 5th, who's your insurance policy at that position? Because you talk about obviously players who would go down and it'd be a big deal. Something happens to Olave.
Yeah.
Who steps in and can carry that receiving core?
And we haven't seen much from Shaheed. They have high hopes for him, and I want him to be the 2. Can he truly be the 2? I think that's a fair question to ask. Speaking of questions, let's go through a couple here on our final word feature here. I know we got a couple.
Yeah.
So let's go one. This is from Todd and Marrero. He says, I think Peyton Turner should be traded because he is injury prone. He probably won't make this year's roster, and I hope the Saints get either a draft pick back for him or trade him to a team for another player that can help the team this year, like wide receiver, offensive line, or safety, which is our weakest positions. Okay, I understand the frustration with Peyton Turner. Right now, I did a roster projection. Go to fox8live.com with the final play app to check it out. We're not going to go through it here. We're going to do a Wednesday pod on the moves they did make as opposed to the projection. But I understand the frustration with Peyton Turner. I still have him on the roster because I like that he's able to kick inside and have some production that way, although he's got to make the play. He's got to finish plays. He's in position to make plays. He had made them in games. He's in position to, he just doesn't actually make them. As for trading him, yeah, I mean, if somebody offers you a 6th-round pick for him, okay, that's fine, but I just don't see a team doing that. It's possible, certainly possible, but bottom line, I understand the frustration with Peyton Turner.
Definitely. And I think he did help himself a bit throughout training camp, and he's had some moments at times in the preseason, but because a few months ago when they didn't pick up his 5th-year option, we were talking about, man, your roster spot is not guaranteed. We're not even sure you'll be on the roster by September. I also feel pretty good about Peyton Turner being on the roster. I think he's outperformed Isaiah Foskey, who we haven't seen or heard much of throughout the preseason and training camp. So I think he'll be on the final roster. But trade-wise, like you said, if you find somebody who wants to trade for Peyton Turner, have at it. But I don't know how much interest there's going to be there because other teams really haven't seen much from Peyton Turner.
That's it. I mean, what are you going to give up for a guy like that? I mean, he's got – right now, the league views him as a first-round bust, and that's just the way it goes. Yeah. Let's get like one or two more so we get a few here before we get out of here. This is from Sonny and Kenner. What's the latest on Marshawn Thomas? Thomas in quotation marks. I'm assuming Lattimore being an injured guy, Michael Thomas being an injury guy back in his time here. What's the latest? I think he'll be ready to go for week 1. And if not week 1, shortly thereafter. It's incredibly frustrating. I understand because he's had injury issues and he's had an issue with coming back from injury.
Yep.
That always seems to be longer than initially projected. I don't know if we ever got an official projection or a timeline for this, but it does sure feel like a long time. We saw him in street clothes yesterday. He was out there. It's a good sign. But Lattimore is one of those guys when he's on the field I don't worry about. The problem is his lack of availability. So I can understand, once again, the frustration with Marshawn Lattimore. But the truth is, I don't need to see him in training camp. I need to see him when it counts, and hopefully he's back on the field when it counts.
I agree. Training camp, preseason, I'm not worried about Marshawn Lattimore. If he's ready to go for game 1, great. He's doing his job. Now, if this starts bleeding into week 3, week 4, week 5, and you're still getting those questionables, those doubtfuls, those outs, then at some point you start worrying, and the talk that we were having in March comes back up of, do you trade Marshawn Lattimore? Is Marshawn Lattimore's long-term future in New Orleans? Those questions are going to be asked, but that can all be rectified if he gets on field, does what he does, because when he plays, we know he's a top 5, top 10 cornerback in this league.
And you don't. There's only so few top 5 players that, regardless of position in the NFL, and you got one of them. So that's just a fact. All right, last one here before we jump out of here from Dustin in Alexandria. If you are coach, this is a good one. If you are Coach DA, who is the 5th wide receiver to make the roster? Okay, I'll give you my 5. I've got Olave, Shaheed, Wilson. I think it was the top 3. I've got A.T. Perry. I think he helped himself yesterday. And number 5, I think this is going to be manipulated based off, veteran roster, practice squad elevation, whatever. But right now, the active 5th guy I have is Bub Means. I know he had some drops. I know he didn't do well. That jet sweep was not Trevor Penning's fault, by the way. That was all Bub Means' fault, by the way.
Yeah.
Didn't read the play correctly. But they drafted him. He's got some flashes. He's had some inconsistencies, as does every single rookie in the NFL in their first training camp. I think they like his personality and sort of his ability to adapt to the culture here. So right now I have Bub Means, but I think this is a situation where Equanimeous St. Brown gets cut, and if he's able to come back, re-sign him to the practice squad, he's that standard elevation guy that they bring up on game day, because I know there's a limited number you can do that, but he's a bigger guy that is at least decent in the blocking realm as well.
I agree with your 5. Obviously, Olave, Shaheed, Wilson. A.T. Perry is somebody who through the media, behind closed, it seems like Dennis Allen has really challenged coming into this offseason. He had a good end of the season last year, and Dennis Allen has repeatedly said, I want to see something from A.T. Perry. I want to see him take that leap. And A.T. Perry, he had the 50-something yard catch from Jake Haener in week 1. He's had his moments. And
the big catch yesterday as well with the double move. Yeah,
the big catch yesterday. So A.T. Perry, I think, has helped himself probably more than any other receiver in the preseason. So I think he'll be on it. That 5th one, Equanimous St. Brown, Bub Means. I lean Bub Means because he was a draft pick. He's younger and he's got more upside than Equanimous St. Brown does. But I agree, Equanimous St. Brown, he made a good catch yesterday. We've seen him at moments throughout the preseason. I think the Saints would like to keep him if possible, if he can clear waivers and everything. But I think the top 5 are going to be the top 3 plus A.T. Perry.
And here's the
Bub
thing,
Means.
depending on matchup, this is good to talk about for, podcasts and blogs and everything. But a lot of times the 5th wide receiver isn't even active on game day. So it's like it's one of those type of things based off matchup, what they can do via special teams.
And guys, don't forget that you can submit your final word questions to us in the Final Play app. You'll find that in your app store. Go inside the app, hit the top left corner, and you'll see a section that says Final Word, Submit Question. There you can submit your question, and it can be answered here on the podcast or even on the Black and Gold Review with Juan Kincaid, Sean Fazende, and Deuce McAllister every Monday night.
All right, we covered a lot today. Anything else for us today?
No, I'm good. Cut day tomorrow. We'll see how that goes.
We'll see how it goes.
We're going to have a pretty big podcast coming up after that as well.
No doubt about that. All right, he's Andre Johnson Jr. I am Sean Fazende. Thank you guys for watching. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.